Hello, everybody, and welcome to a special edition of the Post Daily News Show. I am John Pollock, joined by Wai Ting, and I am joined by him closer than you would imagine. Uh, Dude, can you possibly explain this
No.
day and what a series of just insanity? This is the problem of when your cell phone provider is also your internet provider, and it goes down for most of the country, as we have experienced today with Rogers. That is our, I would say along with Bell, those are your two major providers in this country. One of them is down, and it eliminated all communication that I could have with anyone this morning. I could not make a phone call, much less get online. I rode my bike to the library where people were not allowed into the library because of this outage. I just went to go grab a coffee. Debit machines, credit card machines down. Everything is down. And had to knock on Wai's door. I came all the way to his house. And the first question is, did you hear the news about Vince? No. What's going on with Vince? That's my morning. I'm in Wai's basement right now, in his his main area downstairs. We are a floor apart.
It's never a good time to not have the internet. I think if you're anybody, but especially if in our line of work, and especially on a day like today, I I can't tell you, this is really the worst time to have any sort of outage like this. But thankfully, you made your way over here. We have a show, and we're all caught up, and we can deliver it. And we have a special guest with us today as well.
That's right. We're going to be diving into, obviously, the big follow-up story from the Wall Street Journal. And joining us from Between the Sheets, you can also read his work over at Fanbyte. We have David Bixenspan returning to the show, second week in a row. Hello, Bix.
Short notice, but why not?
Well, that's, we got to put the bat signal out there, and here comes David Bixenspan to chat with us. So I'm just going to go over some of the notes from the Wall Street Journal's reporting today. This was a major follow-up, reporting that over the past 16 years, they're alleging that Vince McMahon paid over $12 million, going back to around 2006, to keep allegations of sexual misconduct and infidelity quiet. This includes one settlement of $7.5 million to a former wrestler alleging that McMahon coerced her into giving him oral sex and then demoted her and released her in 2005 after resisting further encounters. Very damning allegations, obviously. And then approached McMahon in 2018 and negotiated the settlement. There was another story of a WWE contractor who produced nude photos that McMahon had allegedly sent unsolicited, and this person also stating they were sexually harassed on the job, signed an NDA in 2008 and was paid roughly $1 million. And then we have a former manager who had worked for 10 years for McMahon stating that he initiated a sexual relationship, and this person was paid $1 million to keep quiet in a 2006 agreement. This in addition to the settlement that had previously been reported last month involving a former paralegal at WWE worth reported $3 million figure signed in January. Also in this is more on John Laurinaitis, stating that the board of directors in WWE, they are investigating Laurinaitis having his own sexual relationship with this same paralegal, and they are investigating a 2012 NDA linked to Laurinaitis for $1.5 million after a misconduct claim with the woman alleging that she was demoted after she broke off her relationship with John Laurinaitis. Those are some of the key facts. This 2012 NDA, they also note, kind of comes up in the same time period when Laurinaitis stepped down as head of talent relations, but was installed in that role again last year. So broad reaction, Dave, just to reading this story. And I mean, obviously, this is, mounting allegations against Vince McMahon, who thus far has been meeting these allegations with a very public profile over these past 3 weeks.
Although no official response to the Wall Street Journal, no WWE spokespeople, no Jerry McDevitt, nothing.
No, very noteworthy that the board of directors did know about this because they declined comment. And then, yes, they stated that Laurinaitis and the attorney for Vince McMahon did not comment to the Wall Street Journal. So that is, I think that's noteworthy, especially that in the past, Jerry McDivitt has, rightly or wrongly, typically offered some kind of statement or response, and they are definitely keeping a quiet profile here.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really jumping out at me is that I think because it's about the allegation we already knew about from a few weeks ago, is that there are more details about the thing with the paralegal, and it's, in the broader sense, more damning. Let me just read from the article real quick. The former paralegal to whom Mr. McMahon agreed to pay $3 million was brought into the company as a legal assistant in 2019, according to people familiar with the matter. She never applied for the job, these people said. Mr. McMahon had met her at his Stamford, Connecticut condo building where both were living, the people said. WWE placed her in the legal department because the woman's resume said she had attended law school, the people said. The woman often talked with colleagues in her department about her close relationship with Mr. McMahon, the people familiar with the matter said. The talk about Mr. McMahon was so frequent that her boss asked her to stop, saying she was making other employees uncomfortable, according to one of the people. And then from there, they go to what we already knew about, with the being transferred to work under Laurinaitis. But that paints things in a new light relative to the information we had a few weeks ago, I think. I feel like that almost jumps out more than the new allegations in some ways.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, just in seeing the coverage over the last couple of weeks, Bix, WWE put out the statement that this was a consensual relationship. And certainly that's been a word that you've seen a lot of people lean on and kind of present it as that. And I mean, this certainly does paint that picture, but that was always, a WWE statement about this being consensual, and the new details. I mean, you certainly get a more broader view of this relationship, quote unquote.
Yeah, and a few things to stress there. One is that, like you said, I don't know how much of this is bad faith, how much is just bad media literacy, but that's WWE's statement. I mean, I'm not putting this on you guys. You guys have handled it correctly, but I've seen a lot of people internalize the WWE statement as if it was part of the Wall Street Journal reporting. It was not. They're the ones using, quoting the friend's email to the board saying she was, passed like a toy, or whatever the exact phrasing was. And the other thing we need to be clear about when we use the word consent, and I think I've tweeted this once or twice since all this went down. How do I put this? In the criminal legal sense of the term, you can consent without necessarily, in the moral sense of the term, consenting, which I guess is to say, when they say consenting, we don't know how they're using it, but there's inherently a power imbalance where you can't fully consent if your boss, especially in this case, who is the ultimate head of the company, billionaire owner guy, is coming on to you, because you don't know what the repercussions are. So even saying it's consensual, even if you take them at face value, it's not necessarily the whole story because of the specific dynamic.
And we're seeing, through this reporting, like a pattern of this, of Vince McMahon having this power imbalance, and alleging that one woman was let go afterwards for refuting these advances, or wanting to, in the case of John Laurinaitis, end this relationship, and this having a detrimental impact on their careers. So I think this is painting a broader picture of a pattern of behavior for Vince McMahon. And this is without other stories that we have seen, including the tanning salon incident from early 2006 as well, that included nude photos and included sexual misconduct as well. Like this is painting a picture, and the question becomes, how much of this is this board of directors able to withstand, and what Vince McMahon himself can withstand, and then what are the options at play here for somebody that is the most powerful person in this company? Like, what options does a board have to play with here?
And also, yeah, that's another pattern, that, because I don't know if you mentioned the nude photos earlier in the new Wall Street Journal article, that one of the allegations also includes unsolicited nude photos.
That's
now
right.
We have a pattern of that too.
The tanning salon. Yeah.
I mean, it's so weird because I don't think we got into this when I was on last week because it was more about the Rita Chatterton stuff. When you really think about it, obviously the answer is because he can, but it doesn't make any sense that he can step down as CEO and still be in charge of creative because he has no formal title as head of creative. Head of creative was part of his CEO duties. It's obviously it's a smokescreen, but it's like, what do they do? Because it seems like the board can remove him from his role, but he still has the controlling voting power from the stock no matter what. So there are things they can do. The question is, how much does he fight it and who would get through to him, I think.
And what as well, when you look at this, like from a just responsibility factor, like here is someone that has now multiple public allegations of detrimental behavior, and that's putting it lightly, in a workplace environment, and you are willfully putting this person in that, not just in the workplace environment, but running the workplace environment on a weekly basis when he is at these television tapings. Like he is the final person that is overseeing all of these independent contractors and employees at TV every Monday and Friday.
Exactly. And especially since Laurinaitis got put on leave.
Right.
Like, it just makes it more obvious. Now, granted, and I'm not saying this is an excuse or anything, but I'm sure a big part of this, besides Vince's personality, is the whole thing where they've put out in, basically every filing that would have risk factors and stuff going back to going public, that the loss of Vince's services would be incredibly detrimental to the company. Now, in practice, with his increasing age and the decline of creative and stuff, that's probably a lot less true than it used to be, but still, it's the guidance that Wall Street's going by. And I got to think that is a factor in all this, but at what point does this become too much? Like, I was a little surprised that the Wall Street Journal article didn't even, with a link or anything, reference the Rita Chatterton thing. But I get it to a point. Sometimes you want to focus on your own reporting with that kind of thing. Maybe it's a lawyer thing. But, it's so where are we at now? About 3 weeks since the original story?
Yeah.
So in 3 weeks, we had the original story. We had the Rita Chatterton story with now Mario Mancini corroborating her. And now we have this in 3 weeks. I think part of the question at this point is also, what is going to be the dividing line between this exploding into more of a mainstream story? Not that it isn't one already, but there's still...
I don't think it's crossed the threshold, David. No. I think like the June 17th, the first Wall Street Journal report, that came out on a Wednesday. So we're just talking just over 3 weeks ago. That certainly had a lot of attention, and Vince did his appearances on television, and then it's sort of simmered down. The Rita Chatterton story, I mean, yes, some places picked it up, but that to me, it did not gain a whole lot of traction. That one kind of came and went, and now we're in the midst of this one, and it's hard to say if this one is going to, if this kind of is a tipping point, or if this is one again that he just withstands. Like when you saw him showing on that UFC broadcast, it's not like that arena booed him. It was, look, it's Vince McMahon, the great wrestling promoter. And that's sort of been the strategy. And he has been given a hero's welcome showing up at television. And thus far, like he has been able to weather this storm. And the question will be, will additional allegations that now come forth, like what is the tipping point? And I don't know the answer to that.
I hate to say it because it shouldn't matter when it's coming from a source as legitimate as the Wall Street Journal. But I do think for a lot of people, especially the average person, it's not going to affect them as much until their name's attached to it. Like I think having a name and a face, look, we saw that with Dark Side of the Ring and Plane Ride from Hell. Right. I think to a degree. And specifically, that Heidi Doyle was interviewed and you hear it all in her voice. I think for better or worse, I think to a lot of people, it makes a difference to have a name, have a face, in this case that it involves talent, and we're not going to speculate about who that is, but still, I think this one might, with some people, make a bigger dent. But I think until there's a name, especially one that people are familiar with, I do think there are a lot of people that are going to disregard it more easily. Especially wrestling fans that might be more inclined to put blinders on about this kind of thing. So I don't know. How do I put this? I kind of feel like, well, not even just that, I should say. I feel like if we at least had a story in someone's own words with details, even if you shouldn't have to give every lurid detail, I think that would also speak to people more, even though it shouldn't have to. I think the fact that it's been kind of and I don't mean this as a pejorative, but more of a colder, detached, people familiar with the matter kind of style of reporting, at least in the Wall Street Journal stories, I do think that's going to grab people less than something more personal would, if that makes sense.
I think it's a combination, and believe me, I'm not discrediting that a lot of people take this very, very seriously, but there's also a public that I think that there's a percentage of people that, number one, don't want to believe this. Number two, it's Vince McMahon, and this is the sideshow carnival that they're just going to dismiss as just write it off completely. You look at the Ray Rice case, like those details of that elevator incident were out there, but it was a different level of acceptance and understanding and coverage once that video showed, and there was no more dismissing it or trying to rationalize it either. And it's a bizarre sort of calculus to this entire thing of what lands with the public and what takes allegations into meaningful response from those that are in these power positions to take action with the person being alleged of these issues.
Yeah, and it's also weird to think about how, with Rita Chatterton, if she came out now, if she or someone like her had come out now with, in a way, similar, so let's just say on camera interview, wherever it's with,
yes,
like she did in 1992, if anyone did that now, that I think would have a giant impact.
It explodes. It explodes with that kind of testimonial, explaining it. Here is a victim. Here is the face of a victim, and here is the horrible thing they are describing happened to them. I agree with you.
Yeah, and like I think I said on the show last week too, I mean, just look at the difference in just if you watch her on Now It Can Be Told, which was the thing more people had seen, versus when she was on Geraldo and had a lot more time and didn't have the manipulative editing and music and all that, and just how much harder it hits, but more credible she comes off, etc. Just as someone who is telling her story in her voice, and that's it. Like it makes a difference. Should it on, in a factual sense? No. But, people have emotions and those are more likely to sway them than just people familiar with the matter told the Wall Street Journal, blah, blah, blah.
Does this recontextualize to either of you his reaction to appear on screen so quickly after the initial set of allegations were brought forth, and knowing that others would come up eventually? Like what exactly do you think was going through his head with these multiple on-screen appearances? Does it change any of that?
I think it's just still defiance. We should note that Sean Ross Sapp reported on Fightful Select that one WWE staffer told him today that, let me make sure I have the exact wording correct. As I pull it up in my email. That after Vince McMahon's quote-unquote pointless June 17th appearance on SmackDown, that is the first one, he returned to the gorilla position and shouted, "Fuck him," seemingly in response to the allegations that caused his insistence to appear on television. I mean, that kind of says it all, doesn't it?
Yeah, and that's going to speak to people out there that are just going to look at here's crazy Vince McMahon, and they're going to gravitate to that kind of defiance. We're sitting here at just after 1 Eastern time. I have asked if Vince McMahon is at TV today. I just got a response that the person would follow up and let me know shortly. So that's still a question mark. But presumably, like, he could be at TV today. I can't even throw out the idea that we get another one of his appearances tonight. I don't think you could absolutely dismiss that. One other thing to note is that a PW Insider just put out a statement that WWE sent out internally, reading, the Wall Street Journal has published a second story with expanded details on its initial WWE report last month. We want to reiterate that we and our board of directors take these allegations seriously. We've been cooperating fully with the investigation led by our board of directors and will continue to do so until its conclusion. Please note that upon its conclusion, WWE leadership will make itself available to answer any questions you may have. I have many questions, but I don't know if mine will be answered.
Has there been any indication yet whether or not whatever findings the law firm comes out with will be published publicly or anything?
No, that's a huge question of what level of transparency this investigation by the board of directors will have. And again, like, it is noted, like, it's clear the board of directors knew that this follow-up was coming. This was not, a surprise that the Wall Street Journal was continuing its reporting. And, whether this is connected loosely or not at all, we did just see Connor Schell resign from the WWE board of directors just 2 days ago. So, I mean, there's that aspect to the story as well. And especially the non-WWE board members, ones that, are not working inside of the company,
right?
What attachment they want to have to this, with the idea that, the Wall Street Journal is going to be reporting on more of this. Like, how much do you want to be attached to this brand at the moment?
Right. And I haven't looked into to see if this firm, when they've done this with public companies in the past, has published anything, but we should note, like, I forget the name. They are a legit firm that can be trusted to do actual independent investigations. They are not a firm that is just going to give WWE the answer that Vince would want. And that's important here because, the only other time we know of that WWE had any kind of, quote unquote, independent investigation, it was 30 years ago when they hired Fairfax Partners to, as we would learn, and unsurprisingly, basically just be their PIs throughout Titangate and then the grand jury investigation and all that. There are stories of, at least off the top of my head, Phil Mushnick and Tom Cole both realizing they were being followed, and I think in both cases confronting the PI too. That it was not an actual quote unquote independent investigation. It was them hiring their PIs to figure out what was out there. So I almost feel like people are sleeping on that, because also I gotta think, based on how we can kind of infer the initial leak took place anyway, that even if the report isn't formally made public, I gotta think we will be hearing what's in it.
Yeah, and again, like, I think it'd also be a mistake to paint the non kind of McMahon family board members, like kind of your outside board of directors. They are less incentivized than I think people realize to just sweep findings under the rug. Like, I think these are people as well that are major players in media as well. Like, I don't think they want to be attached to something that is just quietly either withhold their findings or not be above board, essentially, in all of this. Wait, what are just some of your reactions to the story, and any kind of response you expect to see over the next couple of days on the WWE side? What Vince McMahon, how he reacts to this? Is this one where he does sit it out and takes a more private profile instead of the strategy a couple of weeks back?
I would have said that he would have done that after the last one came out. We're talking about the Wall Street Journal, and we're talking about a lot of mainstream press that is recognizing a lot of this stuff that's going on. A lot of my friends who don't watch professional wrestling are well aware of what's going on here with Vince McMahon. So him reacting the way he did last time really makes this time completely unpredictable. I would tend to think so many more stories coming out involving your name and hush money and involving sexual misconduct is enough to deter you from being away from the public eye and being attached to this company entirely. But with him, I could see somebody doubling down. A big question is like, he does have advisors, and at what point do people step in and tell him, hey, Vince, like, chill out. You need to be away from this because it's not helping us whatsoever. But obviously, much of that is determined by the stock price, which, and let's be honest, these ratings, which have only increased since all this stuff has come out. So much of it, I think, I'm sure he's wondering how he's going to use it to his advantage today.
In your sort of reporting and investigating into the whole Titangate scandal, Bix, I mean, how prevalent do you sense NDAs were at that time for the WWF, if at all? Like, do you feel like that was is this something that that it existed to the extent that we're starting to see here with this current version?
It's hard
if
to
you
say.
can answer that. I know it's a kind of difficult question.
How do I put this? I mean, okay, here's the best way to put it. I mean, I have Tom Cole's settlement. I've published Tom Cole's settlement. There was no, non-disclosure, non-disparagement provision as part of that. And that's the first one. And that's based on the way Titangate came about and that it didn't seem like anyone had one. I think we can safely assume that's probably the first settlement of that kind they ever did. It's possible it wasn't, but I think it's a safe assumption. As far as the people that we've all kind of assumed over the years had settlements because they just kind of suddenly disappeared, some of them suddenly buying a new car and all that from Titangate, whether they had NDAs or not, I don't know. I mean, I can tell you this much. I'd have to refresh my memory on the exact language, but both when HuffPost, I should say, reached out to him in, I think it was end of 2016, and me with Business Insider when I reached out in 2020, both of us, when we reached out to the accuser, who was a ring boy who sued them in 1999, who had not come forward previously, I forget what wording we used, but it was declined comments citing an agreement with the company.
Right.
If you give me 1 second, I can find the exact wording I used. But like in that case, I honestly don't know if he was out of sorts by mentioning that it existed, but in both cases, he was clearly comfortable with at least saying that the agreement existed. So there is that. So I guess the earliest thing we can point to definitively then would be 99. Emily Feinberg, who had been Vince's assistant that he had an affair with, which we know, was a thing people talked about for decades, but now is a thing we know 100% factually because of the transcripts from the steroid trial that Jack Encarnacio ordered that had all the sidebars with the judge, even though it wasn't supposed to. But it has the lawyers talking about how they're not going to talk about that during her testimony. And we know she didn't have an NDA because, as we would learn later, boy, how do I explain this without getting into the weeds too much? One of their lawyers' secret fiancés approached her about doing a book with her under the guise of actually just getting information out of her. So it seems like she didn't have an NDA, but and that's earlier on too. And you know what? We should probably mention the whole path, of Emily Feinberg's, career in the company. Especially in light of what we know now about the paralegal thing today. Emily Feinberg was hired to be someone else's assistant. I forget who. Then Vince saw her. I forget if he learned that she was a former Playboy playmate or it was just he saw her. And then all of a sudden she became Vince's assistant.
Put her in one of the music videos as well, as I recall, for one of the...
On Pile Driver?
Yeah. Was it...
I don't think so. I think that was... I have to refresh my memory on the timeline.
Okay. I could be mistaking it with somebody else as well. I guess the question also comes up of just kind of your understanding of what the thinking would be if someone chose to break an NDA, if the allegations were such, and what the response would even be from a Vince McMahon. Like, obviously there is the financial penalty that you could be facing. But you look at some of these allegations that, I mean, I think that's like a worthwhile question here of somebody that would be willing to break an NDA and put their name attached to any of this.
Like, do you think there's anyone that would be willing to, or what would we expect WWE's response to be, or more that?
Yeah, like, I mean, in the sense that if we were to look at, some of these allegations and someone were willing to break their NDA, would Vince McMahon be just turning around to sue this person for breaking this NDA? And like, that to me has always been kind of this sort of gray area when you're talking about the potential of like criminal allegations that a piece of paper can forbid somebody from speaking about as well. And if someone would just flat out think that this is big enough that it would be worth breaking an NDA over.
Well, my understanding is that if it is about something that's criminal in nature, it's not enforceable. That a court would rule that it's not enforceable.
Coerced to having sex would sound like that would meet that parameter.
I agree with you, morally at least. Without knowing more about the allegations, I don't know if I'd go that far, but I agree with your sentiment at least on that. It's hard to say. I mean, look, I won't get more specific in this. There are people in wrestling that we know have NDAs about other stuff, and I don't think they'd get actually sued if they decided to talk. But WWE with Vince, I don't know. I mean, they haven't been as much like proactively hassling people legally and in the way that they used to of late. But the last time they really went full court press with that was, I mean, even if it wasn't for breaking NDAs or anything, was, coming out of Titan Gate with the lawsuits against Phil Mushnick in the New York Post and the lawsuit against Geraldo Rivera, his people, Rita Chatterton, David Schultz. So, it goes to the whole thing of Vince always has his patterns, Vince never changes. But I don't know. I really don't know with WWE if I think they would sue or not, because then you're just dragging it out though too. I mean, I guess the question is also, do the NDAs have like an arbitration provision? Would he have to go to court to enforce
go through
get
discovery,
the money back
like,
or whatever? Right,
yeah, like,
or would it just be an arbitrator? Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I think like that would be a side as well that if Vince McMahon had to go and speak under oath or something like that, I don't think that's something he's all that interested in when it comes to this. But I mean, we're kind of getting ahead of ourselves into just like a kind of speculative territory. But I guess any sort of closing thoughts, Bix, that we haven't like touched upon here that you're looking in terms of kind of the next steps to all of this. We can update in terms of the stock. It opened at just over $65 today. It's trading at $64.22. So it's down, but not to any significant degree since this broke this morning.
I think we really do need to start looking at this more as a company culture story, especially since the law firm that's investigating for the board explicitly said that they are looking into the company culture as well. Like, this isn't just extrapolating on my part or yours or anything like that. We know that is part of the investigation.
Mm-hmm.
So you factor in stuff that's not just Vince, like the other Titan Gate allegations, like
John Laurinaitis.
Yes. Well, yes, of course. Yeah, we're kind of underselling the John Laurinaitis thing here, that we have more details, a little bit more details.
Vince McMahon completely overshadows John Laurinaitis in all of this. Somebody that was in the head of talent relations position for 8 years before the second tour of duty in the same position as well, and someone that is on administrative leave at the moment. Like, Vince McMahon is going to take over all of the headlines and focus of this. But that's, that goes to your point about the culture here that John Laurinaitis is a link to.
Yes, and also, I mean, look back at last year too, when, in the grand scheme of things, kind of a stupid thing for everything to come to a head over, but with Mark Carano getting fired not long after Laurinaitis came back over the whole trash bag, with women's belongings story, it quickly became clear that this was not a Mark Carano problem. That, granted, he had been in talent relations for a long time, but that it was something that had happened under the previous Laurinaitis regime anyway. And they didn't seem willing to sacrifice him at all at that time. And it does make you wonder a little bit, even if it was more the current, recent releases of the women who got their belongings sent back to them in trash bags that was the focus. And again, you say that out loud and it sounds so stupid, especially since, how do I put this in a way that's completely appropriate? It's not like we hadn't basically been making jokes and innuendos about John Laurinaitis for pretty much the entire time he was running talent relations and talking about it. I mean, public stories, like things that we can definitively say, like hiring women directly out of looking for them in bikini catalogs. It just goes to the company culture thing too. Maybe there were other examples of this, but the obvious one that was documented a lot at the time. I mean, there was another one we could get into, I guess, but the whole dating above your push thing that was more common before there were more women around. Look at how much heat CM Punk got for dating Maria Kanellis at the time, which now looks even more insane now that it's more common in the company. But the heat, as I believe Dave Meltzer and maybe others reported at the time, was, oh, he just got here, he's dating above his push. People, I think, need to think about what the larger ramifications of that are and why that would be a perception. There's a lot to unpack here.
Are we at, first of all, I don't think it is the case, but the idea of talent having some kind of unifying force here in the sense of, not wanting this individual on a weekly basis. It sounds ridiculous, but again, that goes to kind of the power imbalance. But I mean, that to me is a huge part of this as well, is kind of the talent voicing their displeasure that this person is here on a weekly basis. And I look at that as, just I guess just another question to bring about, because privately, I'm sure you would get a pretty across the board reaction from talent towards all of this. But again, you are so incentivized not to rock the boat, especially when it comes to someone at the level of a Vince McMahon. But here is somebody that amidst this, he is there at television every week, is going out to do his ceremonial greeting to the crowd at home. And it's just business as usual, despite all of this. I guess my question is, at what point would you see talent coming together? Because for so long it's been this has not been a company where talent seems to rally around their own interests. Even if this would be an example where I think they would pretty much be in lockstep.
It's tricky because when do wrestlers ever rally around anything as far as labor issues? I'm trying to figure out the least dicey way I can say where I'm going with this. I think to a degree, though, because there's going to be all sorts of different kind of pressures that would, I think, prevent some of the women from speaking up just about their concerns. I feel like it would probably, if it were to happen, which I don't think it would, I think it would have to be a lot of the key male stars speaking up. For something to actually happen, which it shouldn't have to, and there shouldn't be all the different pressures on the women that would keep them from speaking up, even though it is more directly in their interest. But I just by the way things work, I think it would have to be the top male stars being the ones to say something. I mean, we don't know if there were, actual formal complaints internally, but last year it did get reported that when Jamie Horowitz got hired as an executive, that at least there were women in the company. It didn't say if it was his department or talent or whatever, that were upset about him being hired because he had, just been fired from Fox Sports a few years earlier after investigation to various sexual misconduct allegations. And that's a company that's one of their most valuable business partners that did that, and they still hired the guy. So if what we would probably safely presume are non-wrestling side employees not willing to rally, then I can't really imagine that the wrestlers would, given the history with all that of wrestlers not doing that.
Do either of you see it having any effect on, some of the more mainstream acts that are attached to the WWE, whether it be celebrity or somebody to the level of a Rock or John Cena, who have plenty of interest outside of this company, and whether or not they would want to be associated with a boss who has these allegations against him?
I mean, with John
Cena,
Cena,
maybe.
it's like, yeah, I mean, it doesn't look like he's coming back to do SummerSlam, like that appearance, even though that sort of everyone thought was the direction. And it's Cena made that call too for Saudi Arabia. He was one of the few who
That's what I was thinking.
who did respond in the wake of everything with Jamal Khashoggi. So I think that's definitely a question. If you're a John Cena, is now the time you really want to be attached? Is this where your other partners and studios you're in concert with want your brand attached to this at the moment? Like my guess would be, if the answer would be probably not. If you're somebody that has a lot invested in a John Cena or a Dwayne Johnson, now is probably not the time. And sadly, maybe 6 months from now, that's very, very different. Sometimes these things happen and then they just ride it out, and the public outcry dissipates, and things slowly just go right back to normal because this person is viewed at such an untouchable level, and that ultimately is where they want to keep them placed. And Vince McMahon, it doesn't get much higher than that in this industry.
The factor with this particular development of having multiple instances of this, suggesting a pattern of this sort of behavior rather than one isolated incident involving a paralegal, I do wonder if that has a significant effect, versus what the original story reported would have, produced. This is now somebody who has shown, if this report, of course, is true, that across multiple years, 16 years now, at least on the trail, according to this report, has revealed that he's been going and doing this and involving other people within his company as well. It's just not an isolated incident, and we have at least a reported proof of it.
Yeah, and if you're including Rita Chatterton, I mean, you're talking that's 36 years ago. So
yeah, and I think we should stress, since it hasn't been talked about that much, in the almost 2 weeks since that came out, when she first came forward, I mentioned this last week, Vince McMahon did tell Dave Meltzer that something happened, but it was consensual. So yes, if we're looking at this strictly through, that's the wrong way to put it, as a continuum that can go from anything from power imbalance, sexual harassment to crimes, then yeah, I mean, it goes back to at least Rita Chatterton 36 years ago.
Yeah. And I mean, in addition to among her allegations as well was bringing up her contract, promising her, fame, fortune, allegedly mentioning how will your daughter go to college? I mean, there's a lot to that, to that story as well.
Which, I mean, we also know is something that people in WWE will bring up in a not in a sexualized or anything manner. I mean, I think back to the story of Paul Levesque trying to re-sign Gallows and Anderson and pulling the whole thing with oh, we don't know how long AEW will be around. When I see you, I see your kids. We know of that being a company tactic too.
Right.
So and that's, from, in that case, it's, from new Vince, so to speak. So it doesn't surprise me that it would be, used in a even more heinous context too.
We got a few super chats here, John, before we wrap up here with Bix. And they come to us from Rory, who sends a super chat. Thank you, Rory, for the support. He says, that's it. He's done. He's gone. I can't possibly come back now. Huge shakeup needed. Step permanent needs to happen. Thoughts to the Abe family in Japan. Yes. Our thoughts are with the unfortunate incident in the family of former Prime Minister Abe. We go to Rory. He also says, do we see him on screen tonight? I hope that outside news gives this the weight it deserves. This affects TV negotiations and other businesses. Bix is the man.
Oh, thank you.
Bix is the man. But I mean, to me, it's like it's down the list of priorities. But when you look at how much is, we talked about this last time, how much is focused on Vince McMahon and all these different projects, and of course the television negotiations. I mean, there's always the potential of that trickle down effect, and of just Fox and NBC Universal. They are. I mean, there was no aversion to Vince McMahon showing up on their airwaves. But you look at the Netflix series, the other the scripted drama, the book that's coming out on him. Like there's a lot tied around Vince McMahon just as a public brand for this company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, 2 different shows planned, because there's the Vince's life documentary series for Netflix that's already in production, but also the development of the scripted series about the trial too. Yeah, which like I've said before, I don't think I've been on here talking to you about it. Like a truthful version of that story which I don't expect, would require explaining that the investigation actually grew out of the Titan Gate stuff and not out of the Zorian trial. So just on top of just the general optics of a Vince hero piece, there is also the fact that you're dealing with something that has kind of reemerged in this way that you wouldn't have wanted to talk about before.
Maybe we're going to have to option our own series way after that the trial series airs. We'll wear it the next day. It'll be called "Okay, Here's What Really Happened," hosted by David Bixenspan.
I don't think that hasn't crossed my mind.
Yes.
A question I've always just kind of thought about is, would Vince hire himself at this point? If there was somebody who brought along a great deal of experience to the company and a great deal of benefit to the company, yet came with all this baggage, I don't think he would touch that person at all. So the fact that
Brandon Thurston, I mean, he just put out that the whole I don't know if it's officially a deposition, but
the deposition excerpt from the Oliver Luck case.
Exactly. Yeah. And that was the thinking, was like, what you've been accused of, would you hire yourself? And they really checkmated Vince in that excerpt of what you could see, that it was very hypocritical.
We have a few more super chats here. We go to John Cena, who sends $5, who says, thanks, Bix, for all your contribution. What are the chances of Vince showing up tonight in Texas for SmackDown? It seems to be what is on a lot of people's minds. How is Vince going to potentially parlay this into a TV appearance? Friday again, just like last time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, my gut says no, but that might be naive. Yeah. It's I absolutely cannot discount it as a possibility if he's there. And in very much like they were rewarded the last time. Like they had a string of big viewership that even extended to NXT that next week. With coming out of this, it was a heightened interest in seeing what was going to happen. So.
Yeah. That does remind me, actually, though. Hey, what do you guys think of the whole thing? 3 weeks ago, where CNBC reported that Vince was going to be addressing the allegations in character when he came out, which has not happened. I mean, I haven't asked, but have you heard, John, have you heard anything about was that actually the plan and he got talked out of it, or?
I didn't hear anything in that sense. I did speak to someone that day who was theorizing that they were probably on the plane figuring out all this stuff. Does the idea of Vince McMahon coming out and pitching that idea that he would flat out address that he put that on the table, that would not stun me at all. I think the fact that we can look at all of this, that Jerry McDevitt is staying quiet, I think that is one person that Vince McMahon will defer to. And
Yes.
if Jerry McDevitt is staying relatively quiet, I think the last thing he is having is Vince McMahon go out there and do anything in regards to addressing this.
Yeah. It's always interesting which stuff he does and doesn't respond to. You know, we talked about that last week, that he stayed quiet for the Rita Chatterton thing. And it also makes me think back to when I did my reporting on the tanning salon thing, how I had no response from him or WWE, which at that time was actually interesting because it was only, I want to say, maybe 2-3 months removed from him sending me and Deadspin legal threats over something a lot more peculiar, which was just like some of the phrasing in my article about the Nicole Bass lawsuit and how their whole defense was slut shaming her. Like, so it was weird to get legal threats for that, but then not the tanning salon thing. I mean, granted, he probably figured it wasn't worth it because it was mostly from a police report and eyewitness, but it always stands out that he doesn't say something. You know, I got this, I have the 3-page letter or whatever I got when I did the Ring Boy story for Business Insider, but I don't know. It's hard to say. It feels like it signals something. I'm just never sure entirely what.
And the timing as well, like that, again, that story broke Wednesday. He goes on SmackDown Friday. And over that weekend, after like a 9-minute mediation with Oliver Luck that just goes nowhere, they settled that weekend. And that case is off the docket. So there was a major shift in, it sounded like those two sides were destined for trial. We had the date set and they reached a settlement that weekend.
Yeah. I know Dave Meltzer brought up, but on his message board, at least, the idea that getting Vince under oath anywhere right now is probably something they do not want. Because I would think he would have testified in the trial. He'd already been deposed, like we mentioned. Mm-hmm. But it makes me think back to, when they filed those media lawsuits in 93, at the end of 93, Jerry McDevitt filed this big motion with this long affidavit from him attached about how there needed to be this stay, this, hold put on discovery in the case until the conclusion of the steroid trial. Because in that case, and at least there was more of a legal argument there, they were arguing that Vince couldn't be deposed until after the steroid trial because there was enough overlap that he could be considered incriminating himself or that they're compelling him at least to testify about stuff that could, in a way that they shouldn't be allowed to or whatever because of the criminal case. And he lost that, and that led to the, both cases being dropped. So if you go by the past playbook, I do think, that is something to think about. Like, I mean, they don't really have much in the way of pending lawsuits right now. But that it seems like they're going back to it. It seems like they don't want Vince testifying.
Just a couple more super chats here to get to. We go to Henry Thompson, who sends $10 and $5 just to support. So thank you so much for that, Henry. Much appreciated. Finally, Brandon from New Jersey sends $2 to say, "What I miss." Well, you can always rewind. But yeah, thank you guys for all your support.
Before we get out of here, Bix, we've talked about the Titan Gate specials that you and Chris Zellner have been doing. You just released part 3 last week. Mm-hmm. I can't recommend enough to truly understand the story. It's such an asset to understand that whole Titan Gate series. And this is Tune the Sheets. That's the outlet to do so. So what are some highlights from part 3 that people can check out on the Between the Sheets Patreon?
So yeah, patreon.com/Between the Sheets. $5 a month tier or higher. I'm sure you'll have the link in the show description and stuff too. One of the things we mentioned when I was on last week, like the shenanigans that got reported in the Observer about someone trying to play both sides, going to different TV shows about things that they said Rita Chatterton told them that this person completely contradicted themselves and had been sent to one show by Jerry McDevitt. And how I don't think this ever got covered again, but was definitely conspicuous. A Current Affair did their story about the scandals that included, right before airing, WWE providing them with a letter that Murray Hodgson had sent them begging for work. And I think we talk more about, the damage that Murray Hodgson probably did optics-wise to other more credible allegations, which I think, it's relevant now to looking back, because if nothing else, he was on Geraldo with Rita Chatterton, and he was on Now It Can Be Told with Rita Chatterton. And, even with specifically Pat Patterson, how many people in their life get one even accused of anything like that, any kind of sexual misconduct, much less falsely, and much less falsely twice, that it made the more credible stuff just kind of erode. So, we talk about that. Give me 1 second as I pull this back up to actually look at my little description I had here. But, that's after, 2 parts where we covered all the other TV shows, including Donahue and Geraldo, and Now It Can Be Told and all that in detail. Okay, here we go. Oh, for Vince Russo historians, lots of stuff on the Vince Russo-John Arezzi split, including a lot in Vince Russo's own words, from an interview that Alex Marvez did with him about the split and about meeting Vince McMahon for the first time. And not the most self-aware thing, but not really surprising. Tom Zank and Jim Ross giving their thoughts on Titangate, including Zank saying for the only time that he actually did leave over some kind of sexual harassment incident. John Arezzi writing about Mel Phillips and their friendship in the 70s and the red flags he had shown back then. Some similar comments from Bill Kunkel in 3 Count. Still airing Mel Phillips stuff on TV. Steve Planamenta, the then spokesperson, word vomiting to Mike Mooneyham in a way that I wish we had today with the WWE spokespeople. So there's a lot there. And then part 4 will come out this month and should be the last part. And that'll have stuff like the return of Pat Patterson, the emergence of Barney, who was the kid on Donahue, who seemed like a WWE plant, and then came out and alleged that he had been abused by Mel Phillips, and that he had talked to Vince McMahon, and Vince basically told him, you need to refute these liars so people will believe your story. So that'll come up in part 4. So there's a lot there. This is pretty much as comprehensive as you're going to get with the scandals, because it dug through, newsletters that aren't online, mainstream media that was around, all that. So patreon.com/betweenthesheets, $5 a month tier or higher. And we do also have the annual option at the highest discount they offer, which is 16% off. So $50.40 a year. So it's patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets. And there are free preview clips of all of these at the end of various, all the episodes, regular free episodes of Between the Sheets that we've done lately.
Well, Bix, I want to thank you very much for jumping on today and doing an hour here with us. Obviously, these are troubling stories, but necessary ones to go over. And historically, that's a great go-to place. Patreon.com/betweenthe-sheets. Tonight, I do not know if we will be back. Rogers is still a just destructive zone of inactivity in Canada right now. So if I have a connection, we will be live tonight at 11 p.m. Eastern time. Follow at Post Wrestling for updates from Way about what is happening tonight. But I want to thank everyone for joining us live. For David Bixenspan, Wai Ting, I am John Pollock, and thank you for tuning in to today's Post Daily News Show.